Welcome back, coders. How are you doing? Today we are going to discuss about the partial pre-rendering, and I am showing you the demo first time. You see, if I refresh, two static portions, I mean header and footer, are rendering instantly, but middle portion is dynamic, so it's taking a little bit of time. So in the same page, something is rendering very early and something is taking a little bit of time. This is called partial pre-rendering. So it has some benefits. So let's discuss about that. But it is the Nextjs 15 partial pre-rendering is experimental. New layout and page config options for incremental adoption. Okay, so it's experimental. That's why you need to give the experimental flag. Okay, and there is a discussion over here. So partial pre-rendering means static and dynamic routes. For more, I will show you code. No worries. I will show you codes how these things are taking place. How's the benefit? I will discuss everything regarding partial pre-rendering. Okay, and you see, so in the same page, this is rendering statically and middle portion is rendering dynamically, and in the if you see, this is partial pre-rendering and its flag is um, half full filled circle. Okay, and they are clearly saying that it's partially pre-rendered. Okay, partial pre-rendered. Partial means this portion and this portion rendered statically and in the middle portion dynamically. Okay, so let's go. So for most web apps built today, you either choose between static and dynamic rendering. You see static and dynamic rendering, and I will show you that this is static and dynamic rendering and partial pre-rendering. Okay, of your entire application for a specific route, and Next.js is called dynamic function. Call a dynamic function a route like querying your database to entire route become dynamic. Okay, so and in Next.js, if you call a dynamic function in a route like querying your database, the entire route becomes dynamic. So if you query a database, it will become dynamic. However, most routes are not fully static or dynamic. For example, consider an e-commerce site. You might want to statically render the majority of the product information page, but you may want to fetch the user's card and recommended product dynamically. This allows you show. So these situations may arise as that some portions you want to render statically and some dynamically. And you see the example, header and footer. These things are, it doesn't change frequently, but in the middle portion, card or products, these portions are changing randomly dynamically. So it's a wise decision to render some portion statically, some portion dynamically. This is called partial pre-rendering. So like a e-commerce site, you might want to statically render the majority of the product information page, but you may want to fetch the user card and recommended products dynamically. This allows you to show personalized content for your users. Going back to the dashboard page, what component would you consider static versus dynamic? Once you are ready, click the button to see how we could split the dashboard route. You see, this is dynamic, and this is static. Is because it is not changing. So it's changing randomly. That's why this is dynamic, and this is static. And likewise, the side nav component does not rely on data, and it is not personalized to the user, so it can be static. So it's not changing and it's not dependent on the data. That's why it can be static and it's not changing frequently. The component page rely on data, change often, and will be personalized to the user, so they can be dynamic. Okay, so these things need to be dynamic. So hot's partial pre-rendering. Nextjs introduce experimental version of partial pre-rendering, a new rendering model that allows you to combine the benefits of static and dynamic rendering. So can you see the benefits? We are rendering static and dynamic content in the same page, same route. Okay, I will show you. I will give you the proof of my speech. Okay, a experimental version of partial pre-rendering, a new rendering model that allows you to combine the benefits of static and dynamic render in the same route. For example, You can render navbar statically, cart dynamically, product information, recommendation, so static, revalidation, and dynamic. When a user visits a route, a static route shell that includes the navbar and product information is served, ensuring a fast initial load. This shell leaves holes where dynamic content like the cart and the recommendation product will load asynchronously. The async holes are streamed in parallel, reducing the overall load time of the page. It reduces the load time, okay? It reduces the load time. So how does partial pre-rendering work? Partial pre-rendering uses the React suspense. So what is React suspense? I will discuss a little bit later, which you learned about the previous defer rendering. It will defer rendering parts of your application until some conditions are met. Data is loaded. The suspense fallback is embedded into the initial HTML file along with the static content. A build time during revalidation, the static content is pre-rendered to create the static shell. The rendering of dynamic content is postponed until the user requests the route. Wrapping a component in suspense does not make the component itself dynamic, but rather suspense is used as a boundary between your static and dynamic. So we also use suspense. So wrapping a component in suspense doesn't make the component itself dynamic. So it doesn't necessarily mean that if you wrap the component by suspense, it will become dynamic. Rather, suspense is used as a boundary between your static and dynamic code. Let's see how you can implement a PPR, partial pre-rendering, in your database route. Okay, and you have to give this flag. Enable PPR in your Next.js app by the PPR file. Okay, and incremental values allow you to adopt PPR to specific routes at Next.js segment config, and you have to give this flag. Okay, that's it. You may not see the difference in your application in development. So to have the experience of partial pre-rendering, you have to build it. Okay, but you should notice the performance improvement in production. So you have to build it. Next.js will pre-render the static parts of your route and defer the dynamic parts until the user requests it. Okay, Next.js will pre-render. Here is the basic concept. We pre-render the static parts. You see, it's pre-rendering the static parts. So both header and footer are loading immediately. Pre-rendered, I mean it's ready, just ready. It will give you rendering, but it middle portion depends on the user interactions or user demand. Rather defer dynamic parts until the user requests them. Okay. The great thing about partial pre-rendering is that you don't need to change your code to use it. As long as you are using suspense to wrap the dynamic parts of your route, Next.js will know which parts of your route are static and which. So by suspense, they will understand that which part of your code are static and which parts of your code is dynamic. Okay. We believe PPR has the potential to become the default rendering model of the application, has the potential to become the default rendering model of your applications, bringing together the best of the static side and dynamic rendering. However, it is still experimental. We hope to stabilize it in the future and make it default way of building in Next.js. Okay, so it's experimental. Adoption partial pre-rendering. Next.js putting into partial pre-rendering optimized that combines static and dynamic rendering on the page. We discussed these things. Next.js currently default to static rendering unless your dynamic functions such as cookies, headers, and uncached data request. These APIs opt an entire route into dynamic rendering. With PPR, you can wrap any dynamic UI in the suspense boundary. So if you use suspense boundary, they will assume that this portion is dynamic and they should render it dynamically. When a new request comes in, Next.js will immediately serve the static shell. Okay, Next.js will immediately, can you see? They are serving immediately the static shell, header and footer. So this header and footer doesn't depend on the API call or outside data, and it doesn't change frequently. Almost they are static. But the middle portion, I mean product detail portion or individual product, it depends on the fetching the data and user request. Okay, Next.js will immediately serve the static HTML shell, then render and stream the dynamic parts of the same HTTP request. To allow to increment adoption, we have added a experimental PPR route. So you have to give it. Okay, and I have used it. To use this new option, experiment prepare config, and you have to give this config. Okay, we are done, and it has some benefits I have discussed. Partial pre-rendering Nextjs is an advanced optimization technique that allows certain parts of a page to be pre-rendered at build time, while other parts are rendered dynamically on the client or the server. The goal is to balance the speed of static rendering with the flexibility of dynamic content fetching, improve both performance and user experience. So it's increasing the performance and user experience. Okay, key concept of partial pre-rendering, static pre-rendering. Some parts of the page, such as header, footer, and any static content are pre-rendered at build time, leading faster initial load time. Okay, dynamic rendering. Other parts of the page, typically data-driven section. So these things are data-driven. Okay, we are calling the API. I will show you a little bit. You see, I am calling the API. So dynamic component, I am calling the API. So this other parts of the page, typically data-driven section, user-specific content, real-time data are rendered either on the server-side rendering, or on the client-side rendering. Hybrid approach. Pages can be mix up starting. So we are adopting hybrid approach. Pages can be mix of static and dynamic content. For instances, portions of a page can load from a static snapshot, while certain sections like user-specific information face updated data during runtime. Benefits of partial pre-rendering: improve performance. So static sections are pre-rendered, reduce the work required when page loads. This makes the page load faster, especially for users with slower connections or device. Dynamic and other parts of the page. Okay, reduce build time. By pre-rendering only the static parts, Next.js can avoid the pre-rendering large dynamic data sets at build time, which can lead to faster build process for sites with large amount of dynamic content. Optimized caching. Since static parts of the page are pre-rendered, they can be cached effectively, allowing quicker delivery to users from the CDN. Better user experience. Critical content is served immediately from the pre-rendered HTML, while dynamic content is fetched and updated after the page load. This gives the user something to interact with the right way, enhancing perceived performance. Flexibility. Developers can choose what to pre-render and what to leave dynamic based on their application's need, providing a highly flexible architecture that balances performance and up-to-date content. Why should you use partial pre-rendering? First, paint. Pre-rendered parts of the page make the site appear faster to users, since they don't have to wait for the entire page to be generated server side. SEO benefits. Static pre-rendered content is SEO friendly, since search engine can crawl and index the pre-rendered HTML, improve the page discoverability. Reduce server load. By minimizing the number of components that need server-side rendering every request, server load decreases, leading to more efficient resource utilization. Granular control. You have the ability to fine-tune performance by pre-rendering sections that don't change frequently and rendering more dynamic content on demand. So partial pre-rendering is especially useful in scenario where some sections of the page remain static across different users or over time, like product listing, blog, title, etc., with other sections depend on the real-time or user-specific data like card details, user dashboard. So we also use suspense. By suspense, they understand that this portion should be dynamic. React is a feature that enables component to wait for some asynchronous operation like data fetching to complete before rendering. It improves the user experience by making it easier to show fallback, loading spinner, who is waiting for data or other resources to load. Suspense allows developers for better manage asynchronous data fetching and rendering the React application, simplifying the process of handling loading states. So we have discussed pros and cons and strategies. Now it's time to implement. Okay. So what I have done, I have created a brand new Next.js project, and in the next config, just use the PPR incremental. Okay, this flag, you need to use this flag incremental, and I have created a page, and I have included header, footer over here, and wrap the dynamic content by suspense. So by suspense, they will understand that this dynamic component should be dynamic, and this is static, this is static, and it will build statically. Okay, and I have created component dynamic content. So in the dynamic content, it is Typescript project, so I have some type declaration, and I am facing the API over here, the single product, no cache, and I am rendering the product in a cart. Okay, nothing else. This is the footer, this is static. Okay, server side component, this is header, and this is a skeleton. Okay, skeleton means when it load, you see the skeleton, there is a dash line. Okay, skeleton. Okay, done. I have shown you the code, and another thing you have to do, const experimental PPR true. So first of all, I am commenting this code line of code, and I am showing you, and I am deleting the next. Okay, I'm showing you from the scratch. So npm run date. Okay, it also gives us the same result, but it's not still partial pre-rendering. Let's see. I'm showing you. I mean, I'm building it. npm run build. So it's taking a little bit of time for building. You see, this is static and this is dynamic. So I need to have this screenshot to show you later when we will use the flag. I mean, const experimental PPR true. Okay, so it's not partial pre-rendering. So npm run start. So still we are getting the same result, but the user experience will be far more better if we use the const experimental PPR true. Still we are getting the same result. Two portions are rendering very early, another taking a little bit of time, the dynamic portion. So right now I am using this partial pre-rendering true. So if I build my app once again, npm run build, now see the difference. You see, this is partial pre-rendering. Okay, can you see the difference? I'm showing you once again. You see the partial pre-rendering, but previously it was just dynamic, and we wrap it by suspense. Okay, by suspense they're understanding that it's dynamic, and as I use this flag, experimental PPR true, but built-in it remains false. So they are partial pre-rendering. So if I run npm run start, so the experience is very smoother and faster than previous. So two static portions are rendering very early, and the middle portion is rendering a bit later as it's depend on the API call and user request. Okay. So I hope you got my point. So if wanna use it for every routes, you can use it in the layout. Okay. So it will applicable for every routes. So I hope that will make sense and these things are crystal clear to you. So in the same page, we are getting static rendering and dynamic rendering. So which portion are static? Those things are running, making ready at the build time and rendering very early, and those things are not changing very frequently, and they are not dependent on the database or data. So you can render it statically to load it earlier. But those portion are depend on the API call or user interactions or user demand. You need to render it dynamically. So in the same page, you are getting the both of the flavor. Okay, and you see my product page, single product. So I hope you got my point. So if things are a bit tricky and tough to you, let me know in the comment. I will make you understand. Thank you very much. See you soon. A little bit announcement. You can get a tremendous and superb course. This is my course. MERN stack, Typescript, e-commerce, Docker, RTK query, and along with deploy. It's a nice and huge course. So its price is $44, but I can give you for my students, I can give it only $9. Okay, so it will last for 5 days, but it will get, you will get $9. If the course is needed, you can contact with me, just $9.99. Okay, so it's a super course, tremendous course. So you will able to learn a lot of things. You will get TypeScript, e-commerce, Docker, RTK query, and deployment. So it is built on React 9.18, Node.js 20, and role-based automatic redirect. So I will give the discount link and coupon code and course link in the description box. You can come and check, and don't hesitate to grab the course. Thank you very much.